but they come by virtue of creation in the image of God. They are equal for every human. They come by virtue of being created in the image of God in a rational, moral, created order. And as such, they're immutable. They cannot be taken away from you. They cannot be changed. Your inalienable rights are your birthright from God. Human rights, though, are granted by governments. And as a general rule throughout history, whenever a nation has a constitution, what you find is whatever rights were being trampled on before the revolution are now enshrined within the constitution of the new nation. So if the previous government, let's say the American Constitution is a great example, the British soldiers were quartered in American homes here in New England, is that right? Yes, and that is why that's in the Bill of Rights, that cannot happen. And so what happens is constitutions are often an affirmation of rights that were trampled on by the prior administration. And if you want to know what the situation was before a constitution was adopted, read the constitution, look at the rights that are explicitly enshrined in it, and that will tell you what the nation was going through before whatever revolution or reformation took place, leading to the new constitution. Now, here in the United States, we have the Declaration of Independence. And that's what it says there, from July the 4th, 1776. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." And I've often wondered, what is the difference between inalienable rights and unalienable rights? I think it is the same thing. I've never found a good explanation for why. Sometimes it's inalienable or unalienable. But anyway, the U.S. Constitution says, among these unalienable rights, so that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And I often wonder if we were to apply these principles to our own General Conference structure, but we won't go down that path today. So coming back to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, there is really no mention of inalienable rights after the preamble, and we then focus on human rights throughout the documents. And the thing about human rights is they are not immutable. They can be given by governments and they can be taken away by governments. Governments can give rights to its citizens by an act of Congress or an act of Parliament, and the next government can come along and just take away those rights. And so human rights are not absolute rights. They are simply temporary permissions you have from your government to do certain things. And, we have various cultural differences around the world, how we interpret these matters. They used to say in the Soviet Union that in Britain, everything is permitted unless it is expressly forbidden. And in Germany, everything is verboten, forbidden, unless it is expressly permitted. And in the Soviet Union, everything is nelzia, which means forbidden. Okay? So we all have different understandings to when we read a document, we come at these documents with very, very different cultural lens on. But Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says this: everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Now that sounds great, yes? By implication, therefore, the ability to prove your legal identity is a prerequisite for legal existence. No legal identity, no legal existence. You become a non-person. Have you ever got a rental car at an airport at 11 o'clock at night and there's somebody in the queue next to you and, I forgot my driver's license? They're a non-person. Or you check into a hotel late at night and the person next to you, it was booked on somebody else's credit card and that card isn't here and they won't let them use their personal credit card. That person becomes a non-person in that moment. And I see as I travel, people forget key documents and they become non-people vis-a-vis travel, transport, accommodation, car rentals, hotels. This happens. And so the Article 6 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, even though it sounds very nice, there's an implied downside to this. It is that if you do not have any legal identity, you don't have any legal existence. Now, the Adventist Church celebrates Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everybody has the right to choose their own religion. And they should not be coerced into that. And we say, praise the Lord. That's in fact in one of our official statements. But the problem with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is Article 29.2 and Article 29.3, and you see those on the screen there. And this is why supporting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is profoundly problematic for us as God's remnant people. Because it says there, this is the quote here from the article 29.2 and 29.3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says, "In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society." What that tells you is that all of the rights listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Articles 1 through 28 are not absolute. They're not unalienable. They are subject to whatever is determined by the public authorities to be in the general welfare of society, otherwise known as the common good argument. So you have rights, and you have the right of liberty of conscience in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but that is subject to the general welfare of a democratic society. If the government determines that the general welfare requires Sunday worship, you have no rights to claim Sabbath worship, for instance. And then the last paragraph there, clause 29.3, these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So if the United Nations declares that one of its principles is to preserve our common home, and that requires Sunday lockdowns and Sunday observance, which is being pushed every year at the climate change treaties. This year, right now in Belém, Brazil, is a massive gathering in northern Brazil of thousands and thousands of activists and governments and NGOs from all around the world, and they're all pushing for coordinated climate change action to save the planet from what they call the climate emergency. And if you look at the language used by ADRA and the language used by the Pope, it is addressed to the Jesuits 10 days ago in the Vatican, it's identical. We're all talking the same language, the need to preserve our common home, the climate emergency, and the common good. And so as the nations and the peoples of the world unite around what they allegedly think is the climate emergency, and there was no global warming this morning in Maine, I can assure you. But as we unite around the alleged climate emergency, we find that Jesuits and ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, are finding common ground and common language and common objectives to secure our common home. But the point about this final statement here is that you cannot exercise liberty of conscience if it runs contrary to the purposes or principles of the United Nations. If one of the purposes of the United Nations, as they're discussing, is to take climate change action to preserve our common home, and that requires one day a week for us all to rest to preserve the world from the ceaseless cycle of economic consumption, that will be on Sunday, then for your God-given right and responsibility to fear God and give glory to Him and to honor the Sabbath day, that is now done away with. The United Nations is not a democratic organization. In plain English, we are only allowed to exercise our rights subject to the dictates of governments, international governments or intergovernmental organizations such as the WHO and other UN and globalist stakeholders. Inalienable rights are mentioned in the preamble to the Declaration on Human Rights, but they don't appear thereafter. What the UN calls rights are not rights at all. They're merely temporary permissions that can be revoked at any moment should what you wish to do conflict with what the global governance regime calls, quote, the general welfare of a democratic society, or goes against the UN's own stated purposes and objectives. So in 2013, the UN published a statement about its role as providing a new global governance regime for the entire world. And in 2013, this is what the United Nations stated. It said, partnership can promote a more effective, coherent, representative and accountable global governance regime. A global governance regime under the auspices of the UN will have to ensure that the global commons will be preserved for future generations. The global commons. The UN's purpose is to preserve the global commons, whatever they define that to be. Essentially, national governments are being reduced around the world to translating global governance priorities into national policy. We noticed in Britain before Brexit that it didn't matter who you voted for, you got the same policies at the end of the day. If you voted for Labour or Conservative, which is our version of Republican and Democrat, the faces changed, but the essential policies would not change. Hence, people voted for Brexit. They wanted nothing further to do with what was being dictated from Brussels. And, even then we got politicians who still follow the old policies and the old agenda. So effectively, changing governments in national elections only changes the players, but it doesn't change the core globalist policies. So you have different politicians, the same policies. In America, we call it the uniparty. The uniparty at work. Now, in 2015, the UN adopted Agenda 2030. Have you heard of Agenda 2030? We hear a lot about Project 2025, but perhaps more worrying at a global level is Agenda 2030. So the UN, you used to have what they call the MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals, and the goal was to eliminate all human poverty by the turn of the millennium, by the year 2000. And actually, they made substantive progress towards that. It really wasn't caused by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, wasn't caused by World Vision, Save the Children, and ADRA. What lifted more people out of poverty than anything else was good government. Government for the people and economic growth around the world. But because they didn't complete the task, in 2015, the UN voted Agenda 2030, which has 17 what they call Sustainable Development Goals, and all of those goals must be rolled out globally by the governments of the world by the year 2030. Hence the urgency we see right now for digital IDs, because we're running up against that 2030 deadline. The goal of the Agenda 2030 is to eradicate poverty, promote prosperity, and protect the planet by the year 2030. And these Sustainable Development Goals are at the heart of the new globalist regime. And if you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 16, the goal you see on the screen is to promote just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. And you say, well, that doesn't sound bad at all. I mean, this is always couched in nice, positive language. It's like, when my father says, Conrad said, I'd like a conversation with you. That sounds like a nice thing until you realize I'm going to have a learning conversation here, not just a regular conversation here. But when you look at the goals, the specific goals of Sustainable Development Goal 16.9, you see them on the screen there. It's taken from the UN website there. They all look fine until this bottom one here, 16.9, says, by 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. Now, I used to work in Azerbaijan. I was right on the Iranian border. And high in the mountains there were many communities, and they were absolutely impoverished. And when children were born, the healthcare system was so corrupt that if your child was born, you had to pay a bribe to the registrar to get a birth certificate for your child. And because many families were too poor, they would choose maybe one child to get a birth certificate. And without a birth certificate, you had no legal identity. Without a birth certificate, your child would not be enrolled in one of the schools in the area. Without a birth certificate, you could not go to college. You didn't legally exist. So what you found were children in the mountains growing up who didn't legally exist. They were non-persons who could never access health or education or transport or travel or pension or any kind of social provision within their nation. And so I realized all those years ago that having legal documents, having a legal identity is a huge deal. We take it for granted until you see people living without it. So you see it on the screen there. I've put it a bit more clearly up here. There is the goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goal 16.9 to provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. And then the indicator that goes with it is this. It says the proportion of children under 5 years of age whose births have been registered with the civil authority by age. And the goal is to have 100% of children under the age of 5 registered with a civil authority. Now, this sounds benign, but it's not. Because just after voting the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030, months later, the UN voted the ID 2020 Alliance. It was established in late 2015, and it was to implement a global digital ID scheme to fulfill Sustainable Development Goal 16.9. And by 2030, this was the stated purpose of the Agenda ID 2020 Alliance. The Alliance aims to have facilitated the scaling of a safe, verifiable, persistent digital ID system consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals agreed upon by the United Nations. So If you want to know, is the UN pushing digital IDs at a global level? Absolutely it is. It's called the ID 2020 Alliance, and that alliance is a mixture of major tech companies around the world, defense contractors, UN agencies, and governments and banks are all collaborating in the ID 2020 Alliance to roll out digital IDs. At the moment, they're doing it on a case-by-case basis around the world. And what they're doing is they're cherry-picking the hardest countries on earth to do it so they can learn the lessons. And so once they've learned the lessons, we're going to come to some specific examples in a minute, then they know how to roll it out for everybody else. So this digital ID scheme, just so we understand exactly what we're talking about, Microsoft is involved in this program. They're on the ID 2020 Alliance. And the beauty about the internet is nothing can be hidden. And there are certain search engines where you type in the name of the website you want and the date and the hour, the year and the day and the month from when it was online, and it will take you back to what was sitting there. So people can change today's website, but with the internet, you can go back and see what it said yesterday or 6 months ago. And on one of those websites, you can go back and look at this is an internal chat group within Microsoft. And they were discussing what participating in the ID 2020 Alliance meant for Microsoft. And in this internal discussion blog, this is what the text says. This is the end of that article. It says, as more and more transactions become digital in nature and are built around a single global identification standard supported by Microsoft, the question of who will govern this evolving global community and economy becomes relevant, especially since participants in the system would be unable to buy or sell goods or services. So there you have it in black and white from Microsoft. They understand the implications that if you don't participate in the digital ID plan that's being rolled out globally, you will be unable to buy or sell. You will be a non-person legally. That's what it's going to be. So these digital IDs will theoretically provide you with a legal ID, theoretically giving you access to health, education, travel, shelter, unemployment, retirement, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare benefits, access to the justice system, and other benefits provided by your government. But the lack of an approved digital ID, or if you are switched off from the system, will turn you into a non-person, legally non-existent, and will exclude you from all access to government or private sector services. So do we have your attention this morning? Yes, I hope we have this attention. Now, there is no plan as yet to turn this into a single digital ID system that was rolled out globally. The key word is interoperable. And what is happening is every government is designing its digital ID system that applies to its country, but so you see the face of it, but the architecture behind it means if you travel from America to Thailand, your US digital ID can be read in Thailand, so they know who you are, and vice versa. So they call it interoperable so that wherever you go in the globe, your national ID will be registered and recognized in that country. So for instance, the EU just announced that Americans coming to the European Union next year will require a digital ID. An American digital ID will be functional in Europe. So you see these restrictions starting to come out. During the pandemic, I discovered there were many loopholes, one of which was it depends who you fly as. And had I flown to Germany as I did, or France, or America, or Britain during the pandemic, had I flown as an American citizen, I would be denied access because they required US citizens to have vaccines to travel to Europe. I always traveled with my Irish passport because then I was returning home as an Irishman, and therefore you didn't need to have a vaccine because I was returning home because I have an Irish passport. And when I traveled to Britain, I traveled on my UK passport because I was returning home, and therefore the vaccine regulations did apply. Okay? I just want to encourage you, get as many passports as you can possibly find. Here in Maine, if you have a grandparent who was born in Ireland, you qualify for Irish citizenship. It's an EU passport. That may come in awfully handy one day. A.T. Jones said there's coming a day when Adventists in America will rue the day or regret the day they did not leave before the mark of the beast restrictions come in here. So this is what Microsoft is saying. The real goal of the ID 2020 agenda is this. Threefold. One is to empower a global governance regime. The two is to exploit threats, both real and imagined, to advance the new globalist regime objectives. You might call that the Hegelian analysis. And thirdly, it's to force an unwarranted, unwelcome, centrally controlled system of digital ID upon all of humanity. That is what the governments of our world are actively doing all around the world today. Most governments of our world are actively rolling this out as we speak. So let's come to those digital IDs worldwide. Now, what you find when you read the literature is that these plans are always bathed and baptized in warm, fuzzy-sounding words. These are some of the words that are used in the literature. UN and NGO leaders talk about financial inclusion. They speak about bridging the ID gap. I didn't know I was worried about the ID gap, but apparently we should be. They talk about citizen-centric financial systems, or even more Kafkaesque, they talk about the people's money. People's money. This is really, though, rolling out the establishment of a global financial system that rewards the compliant and punishes those who refuse to bow to the new globalist agenda. So in Thailand today, they've already rolled out the new digital ID. I used to work with Adventist Frontier Missions, and they're aware of this. What happened in Thailand was that all cell phones are now linked to SIM cards. You cannot buy to a digital ID. You cannot buy a SIM card without linking it to a digital ID number. That means you can't buy a burner phone. That means you can't have a private conversation when you really want it. It is no longer possible to have an anonymous telephone conversation in Thailand. In Nigeria today, one of the most populous countries in the world, and with its own internal tensions between Muslims in the north and Christians in the south, there is a huge struggle going on between the government and the people. And they've rolled out their own digital currency, central bank digital currency. It's called the Naira. And they've rolled out digital IDs for the whole nation. And there is massive pushback in Nigeria from the people who don't want the digital IDs and they don't want the digital currency. So Nigeria is becoming a hotspot for Bitcoin because it's a cryptocurrency outside of government control. And so Nigeria is a Bitcoin hotspot today. And Mexico, with its problems with the cartels and all the rest of it, they've just agreed with the World Bank to roll out a new digital ID scheme by late 2026. And the agreement is in Mexico, nobody can be employed without having a digital ID that verifies their employment eligibility. And no employers, including the Adventist Church, will be exempt from the requirement to verify against the digital ID system. So it's being rolled out in countries like Nigeria and Thailand and Mexico. And as I said before, they're not choosing the easy countries to roll out. They're rolling it out in the harder countries to do it, where you have weaker central government, because they're learning the lessons so it can be rolled out elsewhere. In the UK, the tax authorities, in partnership with the new digital ID push, are redesigning their systems so that the self-employed and the small businesses will be required to submit their tax data quarterly instead of at the end of the financial year using government-approved software. That gives the government more continuous oversight and visibility into people's financial and business activities. And billions are being spent to connect all these databases the government holds into what they call a joined-up database system. So you apply for a driver's license, and that information is visible to every other government department, not just the DVLA. So what this means is that the John Doe who applies for a fishing license is recognized by the administrative clerk who you're talking with as the same John Doe who receives a carer's allowance and the same John Doe who pays $1,500 quarterly in self-employment tax. Joined-up databases allow for the government to have a 360-degree view of all your interactions with every arm of the state. Today, in almost every country in the world, government benefits and services are generally offered on a one-size-fits-all basis. There's a few variations, like the reforms to SNAP that are being pushed right now, that you have to do so many hours of volunteer work to get your SNAP benefits. But as a general rule, government healthcare and government benefits are offered on a one-size-fits-all basis. With digital IDs, the government and joined-up databases, governments can tailor their assistance to every individual on a conditional basis and on a personalized basis. That is, access to government welfare and systems is conditional with compliance with whatever government mandates are in force at the time. Maybe the largest example right now of digital ID is India. And in India in 2016, they passed the Aadhaar Act, and the United Nations, through ID 2020, partnered with the Indian government to implement the Aadhaar system. And today, almost 90% of all India's 1.4 billion citizens are registered with a 12-digit ID registration number known as a personal account number. Registration involves iris scans and checking all 10 fingerprints in order to register as a resident. and that all your identity is stored in a single centralized database known as the Central Identities Data Repository. Theoretically, participation is voluntary, but you need a personal account number to pay personal taxes, to get tax rebates, to open or use a bank account, to have a credit card, to make any bank transfers, any transfers exceeding $600, and there's a huge range of government benefits and subsidies, such as healthcare and education, access to subsidized grain and wheat and seed and fertilizer for the farmers, all of which requires a PAN, a personal account number, in the Aadhaar digital ID system. But as they say, the system is entirely voluntary. It's up to you. You can not participate, providing you don't need to pay taxes, don't buy a vehicle, don't make any financial transactions, don't want a bank account, don't want access to government healthcare, education, or social security, you don't need access to subsidized food or grain or seed, and you never wish to vote. The choice is clearly yours, but it is entirely voluntary. And in the USA, what about us? Well, you've heard of the Real ID Act. You should read it. The Real ID Act of 2005 established minimum safe security standards to help enhance state-issued driver's licenses and ID cards. That's what it was sold as. The Act prohibits federal agencies from accepting any information that doesn't meet these standards, and it mandates the collection of specific personal information, including your full legal name, your date of birth, your social security number, your residential address, your signature, and a photograph. And this standardized data collection across the states of the United States is creating a comprehensive profile of all individuals, which many critics are demonstrating will lead to increased government surveillance. Now, in America today, the following states have switched their real IDs to digital IDs. It's Arkansas, Arizona, California, Colorado, Georgia, Hawaii, Iowa, Louisiana, Maryland, Montana, New Mexico, New York, Ohio, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, and Puerto Rico. These states have already digitized the Real ID system, and it's being rolled out in the other states. And because many of the states didn't want to do this from 2005 to 2020, when the CARES Act was voted in the start of the pandemic in 2020, the Trump administration put teeth in the CARES Act, requiring states to fall in line with this Real ID program. They weren't just pushing help for people hurting with COVID, they were actually rolling out the mechanism for a digital ID for the rest of the country. So let's give some examples of digital ID. I'd encourage you to go back and read the Real ID Act, because the language of what it can be used for is at times really vague. Something like whatever the Secretary of State requires. It's incredibly broad. It's not just so you can have more ID on your driver's license or you can travel with it. So let's look at examples of digital ID overreach. The problem with this is that we face a dilemma. We all want more convenience, but with more convenience comes more control. And we're willing to sacrifice personal liberty and personal security if we have what we think is modern or more convenience today. And because we're not willing to take a step back and realize that the devices we carry in our pockets are essentially 24/7 surveillance instruments, we like the convenience. We like to drive home and stream YouTube. We like to press on a map and say, where's my hotel today? And we like all these apps on our phones. We're being seduced by convenience to yield a surveillance mechanism 24/7 in our lives. And so there are some clear examples of how digital IDs overreach. So here you have, this is the point of connection. This is what you have it for. This is what it actually is used for theoretically. And this is how it can be misused by governments. And some of these, when I say maybe, these already are being misused by governments. So the first is your health records up here. Theoretically, having your digital health records helps for more accurate keeping of all your medication records. In reality, having a digital ID that has access to your medical history allows a government to disallow entrance to parts of a city if your vaccines are not up to date. This is what happened in China in 2022 and 2023. People's digital IDs were switched off which meant they couldn't get access to trains and buses, and they were turned away from certain areas. And when Chinese citizens wanted to protest at banks, which were not giving them their deposits back, the government just switched off their digital IDs. This is known as geofencing. And the government switches or limits where you can go in the city by accessing you controlling on your phone where you can go. And it shuts down all mechanisms you have to get to where you're going. Oh yeah, this happened a couple of years ago in China. Then you have your health provider app. Anybody here have a health provider app on their phone? Yes? Yeah, most of us do. We use that for interacting with hospital visits. When you get a letter from your primary care physician. Yes? I get a letter from my primary care physician after my annual medical. I sit down, I take a deep breath, and I pray Lord, I pray you forgive this doctor for what she's about to say to me. And then I sit down and I read it through. And she lectures me about your LDL is too high, or sometimes my LDL is too low. I wonder, what am I supposed to do about this? I'm not morally responsible for having higher than expected HDL or lower than expected HDL. But anyway, that's another issue. We use our apps for interacting with our healthcare providers. We like the convenience. But as with health record apps, your health provider app can be used to limit access to certain harmful resources or to certain parts of the city. Again, that's what happened in China. You have supermarket apps now appearing. Do you use a supermarket app? Do you buy online with Walmart in the pandemic? Okay, the apps, they know what you're buying for home delivery. A lot of people use that during the pandemic. That can be used for food rationing. It can also be used to deny food to the socially non-compliant. You don't step in line, you don't fall in line, then we'll shut off your access to food. Google Maps and location services. Who uses Google Maps on their phone? And when you download an app on your phone, there's always a question on the permissions. Do you allow permission to share this information? Yes? Always say no. Okay? Because when you say yes, you're allowing this interoperability across all of your apps, so all the providers know what's going on in your life, not just that particular provider. And so with Google Maps and location services, that gives location visibility. The overreach for that is behavior profiling. That one of the benefits or the side effects of 5G telephones is that there are layers of tracking built into the 5G system. So with your 5G phone, if somebody wants to know where you are 24/7, they know exactly where you are. The system automatically follows your route through the city on your way home. In China, the Chinese pioneered these systems in Tibet in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And then they moved the governor from Tibet up to northwest China to Shanxi, which is the home of the Uyghurs. And the major city of the Uyghurs is called Urumqi. And the Uyghurs were somewhat restive. They didn't want to be part of China. And so in the last 15 years, the Chinese government has clamped down really hard on that religious minority group. You've probably heard of the persecution of the Uyghurs, where the men are taken into re-education and indoctrination camps, and the Chinese government has moved handmen into their homes to live as husbands with their wives. And they're trying to breed them out of existence and destroy the home dynamics. Well, the Chinese government has instituted a social credit system across the nation, and they piloted it in Urumqi, and they put smart cameras on every street corner, across every entrance to every building, and they could track somebody, and AI is being used so that if you're going home from work in the evening and you suddenly think, oh, I need to go and buy myself, oh, I don't know, a salt shaker for home, I just nip into Walmart and buy that, that gets flagged in the system as being out of your normal rat run. And if the system thinks that this is suspicious, it can close off access to the shop for you. And so this kind of 24/7 surveillance state is already in existence in China, and it comes with a social credit scheme, where if you're on social media in China, if you don't like enough government propaganda pieces every month, then you lose benefits. You don't get access to a passport. Your children can't travel overseas for education. You can't get a foreign visa. You can't live in a nicer part of town. The Chinese government has a very advanced social credit scheme, and it's tied to digital IDs, which are being rolled out nationwide. It's coming to us. We have a soft version today. It's called cancel culture, but it is coming our way. So we call behavior profiling with Google Maps. You have tokenized items. You've probably heard of the tokenization work with the Bank of International Settlements. And so every nation has a central bank, but the central bank for all central banks is known as the BIS, and the Bank of International Settlements. And they are moving as fast as they can to tokenize all the assets around the world. And you say, well, how does that affect me? Well, the problem with that is that the government can deny you access to your own assets. You can buy a new car these days and it can be remotely shut down. You can buy a property and then be denied access to it by a government through a court order because they know exactly which property you own. Everything is itemized. In fact, with the digitalization program, I was chatting 2 weeks ago with a man in Canada who's managing part of the Canadian government's rollout of their own CBDC. He was telling me that the system is being designed so at the touch of a button, somebody's assets can be just transferred to somebody else on the blockchain. And you can lose everything you own at the touch of a button. So then you have your cameras. Everybody like their cameras on their phones? Yeah, those cameras are nice things. But they can also take pictures, and they can also see what you're seeing. They can also be used to monitor everywhere you go and what you do there. So if you have a laptop at home, most laptops have a little camera at the top of the screen, yes? I understand that Bill Gates and Elon Musk, when they have their laptops, they cover those things over. Because people can gain access to your computers and they can record what is happening in your room without you being aware of that. So we come on to the digital ID, social media messaging apps, and people these days live on social media. We love posting pictures of weddings and me being very happy while I'm in the midst of depression. But they can also be used for profiling. All communication on a smartphone is seen by the social app companies, and this can give consequences. Even today, if you're hiring Gen Z or millennial, most employers should, well, I know, but everything I've seen, employers are looking at your social media history. You don't hire somebody today without looking at their Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat accounts. That'll give you an idea of who you're dealing with, more than anything else. People post things at 3 a.m. when they're exhausted, and there's no filter going on. It's amazing what you can learn about somebody from those 3 a.m. postings. And so even we as Adventists, I've done that. I've checked people's Facebook profiles before making employment decisions. But then imagine if that's being used systematically against all citizens. Then you have smartphones. We use these for telephone, social media, banking, and other apps. But it's also a ubiquitous listening, tracking, and tracing device. And providing through 5G networks, it provides a 24/7 geolocation device for government surveillance agencies to track you wherever you go in the world. Then you have the last two here. For digital IDs, you can have religious and political profiling. Any religion seen as inappropriate can be dealt with by enforcing targeted restrictions on travel, purchases, and financial transactions. It can also be used to determine your political alignment and either target you or restrict you as you plead, including your ability to go and vote. So these digital IDs that are being rolled around are not so much for financial inclusion, but they're for financial control. You know, it used to be that when my boy was growing up, I'd say, David, I'll pay you $5 to mow the lawn. It's a 3-hour job. He was delighted to get $5, and I was delighted to pay $5 for a 3-hour job. But with digital IDs and digital currencies, you can no longer make that personal transaction. You'll have to make a digital transaction, and that will be a taxed transaction. Everything will be known to the government. Nothing is outside the system, and you essentially lose all personal privacy. The core issue here with digital IDs is the ability of governments to engage in personal profiling. It is not the government's role or right to know every aspect of your life. Limited government supports the existence of a morally self-regulating government. The most violent part in America today are our prisons. And the more government restrictions you place on a man, such as in a high-security prison, the more you reduce his capacity to act as a moral agent. When everything is controlled and every decision is made for you, you are reduced to the status of an animal, and men behave as animals in these prisons. And when government reduces its controls on the citizenry, it increases our ability to engage in moral decision-making and to act as moral beings and to live in harmony with our conscience. And so as we see government controls increasing upon society, the natural result is we will see more animal-like behavior because we are losing our ability to act as moral agents in a moral creation. Digital IDs will let government map out every aspect of your health, your personal habits, all of your finances, your personal interests, every aspect of your personal history, all your participation in social networks, your values and aspirations, your religious faith, your political views, and all your personal vulnerabilities. And it also allows governments to act upon that knowledge. It's not just personal profiling. The problem with these digital IDs is you can fuse intimate knowledge, you can merge intimate knowledge about an individual with the coercive power of the state. And when you fuse intimate knowledge about the individual with the coercive power of the state, it means the government will have the ability to restrict all your access to travel, food, money, access to your own belongings. It'll cut you off from utilities and housing, unemployment, healthcare, retirement accounts, welfare support, which is why the push for digital IDs is such a profound threat to civil and religious liberties worldwide. Such an app, these apps that are being rolled out, will inevitably be an instrument of a total surveillance and control society under the guise of digital inclusion and a digital ID. So I hope, my wife says, Conrad, you have a unique ability to cheer people up. And the only good news right now is that lunch is in 35 minutes. And this is the lightest of all the talks we have this next 2 days, all right? But the job of a pastor is not to preserve the institutions of the past. It is to prepare people for what is coming ahead. We want to prepare people to be ready when Jesus comes. And we know that between now and then, there's a time of trouble coming, such as never has been since nations came into existence. Sister White said in 1895, she said, there will be, I'm paraphrasing her here, she said that the price of food will rise so high and the moneyed men are controlling access to the supply of food that there is starvation in the cities of India, China, and America. And she says this will lead to a renewed civil war in the United States. She said that in 1895. And then she says this will usher in the time of trouble of Daniel 12, 1 and 2. So we know there's social polarization in our nation. We saw what happened with the SNAP benefits potentially being cut off just 2 weeks ago. People were saying, we'll just go and take it for ourselves. Law and order will completely break down. And what we're seeing in America today is not a division between right and left, but it's between the social elites and the people. Whether it's AOC or Donald Trump, they're all arguing for the people vis-a-vis the elites. It's not a right or left issue anymore. And so our job as pastors is to prepare people for what lies ahead. When I was in Toronto 2 weeks ago, I sat in a Lebanese restaurant, and that's my favorite food, by the way. It's delicious, Lebanese food. It's healthy and it's nutritious, and it's fresh salads. It's wonderful. And there was a little church opposite, and people were walking by. My eye was drawn to, it looked like a lady in a sari, and it was the color of this thing here, this light, kind of like faded brass. And she was just sitting there, looked at the sari overhead, and the hand was just held up like that. She was sitting cross-legged on the street. And society was just passing her by. And I watched her before I realized, that's a statue. That's not a real human being, that's a statue. And she was sitting there by the entrance to the church with her hands outstretched, not even looking up, begging for a few pennies to come her way. But it was a statue. And my boy was with me, and I said, you see that statue over there? God's people are going to be like that one day. On the outside of society. Excluded from all participation in all financial or government services. Maybe evicted from our homes and our properties that we thought we'd paid off, but you can't pay property taxes if you don't receive the mark of the beast, so your property's gone. That's where we're going to be. But God will watch over his own. So think about it and ask yourself, why are we striving for homes and cars and holidays and bank accounts and retirement accounts? One day, with the digital ID system, it can all be switched off at the turn of a button. What matters is salvation, not the dollars in our bank account or the assets in our balance sheet. So our time is up here. I need to bring this to a close. While the UN talks about inclusion, in reality, it is building a global digital ID system that is inherently exclusionary and will be used to punish regime critics or silent dissident voices by cutting them off from any participation in society. We know this as the mark of the beast in Revelation 13. And it's interesting to me how many secular commentators are now talking about the mark of the beast. Politicians, commentators, journalists are looking at Revelation 13 again, and they're talking about it on social media. They're saying, what does this chapter actually mean? If there ever was a time for us to talk about the mark of the beast and the third angel's message, now is that time. Because people understand that something is coming upon our world, the like of which we've never seen before. The digital mechanism for the imposition of the mark of the beast is being built before our very eyes. The push for digital IDs we're witnessing today all around the world will enable CBDCs and a track and trace 24-hour surveillance regime to be rolled out worldwide that will lead to coercion, whether it be of conscience or of economic activity. So I've been using the image just today from Daniel chapter 3, this picture that you see on the screen. And in a sense, we're in the same situation. Daniel 3 verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, end quote. Now, like today's digital ID system, the statue didn't appear overnight. It was built day by day, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could watch it being built. And they knew that the invitations had been sent out by the couriers to all the regions of the Babylonian Empire, inviting all the leaders to come in. They knew what was coming. They would have seen the furnaces being built beside that statue. This thing wasn't done in secret. It was done openly. And that means they had time to decide in advance what their response would be. And so I preach this today so that we start to make that decision in advance. What do we stand for? What is most important to us? What are we willing to lose or sacrifice in this world to ensure that we remain in the next world? The statue was not built overnight. So those 3 Hebrew boys, they had already decided as the statue went up how they would respond to the coercion of conscience and false worship that would be imposed when the statue was complete. The herald proclaimed aloud in Daniel 3, 4 through 6, You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, and the entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. So God had made Nebuchadnezzar the ruler in civil matters, but Nebuchadnezzar wants to be the ruler in civil and in religious matters. And God has never given the civil authorities the right to rule in religious matters. Civil authorities are there to regulate interpersonal behavior, the second half of the 10 Commandments, but they are not authorized by God to regulate the first 4 commandments, which is our relationship with God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, they answered the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. Why? Because we are accountable to God, not to you. The word Daniel means God is the judge, not Nebuchadnezzar. When you stand for what is right, you don't have to justify to civil authorities. You are justified before God, and he is our judge. But it goes on to say, if our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. They watched the system of coercion being built, and they made up their minds before the moment of truth arrived. They were ready to lose everything rather than disobey God. They chose to honor God and his commandments over the commands of men, no matter what. They were accepting of cancel culture, of dismissal and humiliation and execution on the public stage. They were ready to become non-persons, rejected by their global government that had certainly turned on them, and be thrown into the fiery furnace. And in that moment, in the fiery furnace, Jesus was never closer to those disciples than in that moment. How are we going to survive as non-persons, excluded from everything this world has to offer? We're going to claim the promise of Jesus in Matthew 28:20, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. When the disciples came to Jesus in Matthew 24, tell me when will this be, the destruction of the temple, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? The end there, Jesus concludes his response to Matthew 28 by saying, whatever happens between the fall of Jerusalem and the second coming of Christ, I will always be with my people in a personal way. If we look to ourselves, it's scary. But we have this story from Daniel 3 as a reminder that we are never closer to Jesus than when he is with us in the fire. He delivered them in the fire. Their faith was vindicated, and God was glorified before the whole Babylonian Empire. Jesus' promise to those disciples is the same as his promise to us here today. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So don't bow to men, bow to God. Don't stand for error, stand for truth. Don't settle for today when eternity is on the line. And no matter what happens, may God be glorified through our witness before men and watching angels. Choose today and choose eternity. Amen. Let's close with a word of prayer here. Our Heavenly Father, we see the golden statue being built in front of our eyes. Father, we hear the language. We know what is coming from prophecy. And Father, some you will lay to rest in their graves before that time of trouble comes. But Father, in your grace and by your mercy, I'd like to see Jesus coming again. I want to be among those who do not call for the rocks to fall upon them and hide them from the face of the one seated upon the throne and from the Lamb. But Father, I want to be among those who will stand tall and say, this is our God whom we have waited for. So Lord, between now and then, give us wisdom and discernment. Give us the right priorities in our lives. Guide us in our use of the talents and time you've poured out into each of our lives. And Father, we claim the promise of Jesus that no matter how persecuted we may be, no matter how much of a non-person we may be turned into, we claim the promise of Jesus that he will be with us always, even to the end of the age.